Now available in paperback and e-readers, The Temptation of John Haynes. Given to temptation, pick up this action-packed African-American paranormal romance. Get The Temptation of John Haynes in paperback and e-readers today. In the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, we have had protests take place all across the globe demanding justice. And in those demands for justice, we have had calls for change. And what's really troubling is we have not had those calls made for change from black men. Now, as the primary victim of your racial profiling, police brutality, and racism overall in America, you would think that black men would be taking the lead as related to getting change for black people, as related to the issues of police reform, dealing with police brutality, and dealing with the race issue here in America, because black men are primarily the ones targeted by these race soldiers in police departments. They are targeted for racial profiling by business owners like the ones who worked at Cup Foods, and they run into racism overall in this United States of America. And you would think that black men would be, again, leading the charge for change. But what I'm seeing out here is not black men taking charge and demanding change from a system that has institutional racism in it. No, I see black men in the backseat, and I see others trying to drive the change. And that really is a condemning statement on black men as a collective, because it shows how weak black men have become. Because if black men were strong, they would be the ones taking the lead for change, and they would be the ones speaking for themselves. Because as I see it, black men are the only ones who can really speak on the issue of police brutality, racial profiling, police abuse, and racism here in America, because we are the ones who experienced it every day in our lives, and we have experienced it in our lives for generations. So if this is the case for black men, why aren't black men speaking for themselves? Now, one of the reasons why I believe black men aren't coming out to speak for themselves is because so many black boys grew up in these single mother households. And because they grew up in these single mother households, they have learned how to become these submissive males, and they've learned to follow behind a female or a group of female authority figures like your Black Lives Matter. Now, your Black Lives Matter is a movement run primarily by 3 black females, and that's not something I believe we need when it comes down to talking about getting change or somebody representing our issues in front of politicians, the media, and the overall community of America. When it comes down to a black man's issues, black men should be speaking for themselves. Black men should be leading the charge, and most importantly, black men should be establishing the agenda. Because as I see it, if we are the ones who are primarily targeted for racial profiling, police brutality, and racism in this country, then black men need to be taking the lead on this issue. Because, again, when you have a black man who, like George Floyd and Trayvon Martin and many others who have been murdered, it's up to us to come out here and speak on that issue. Because if we don't speak on the issue, then no one will get a clear picture of what issue we're going to have. Because a female-run group like a Black Lives Matter, they don't really understand the struggles that black men like myself go through every day, nor do they understand the racism that we encounter in this country every day, because the racism a black woman encounters is different than the racism a black man encounters. And when it comes down to a black man's issues can only be articulated by a black man, because his racism and the racism he encounters is a completely different experience than anything else out there. Because a lot of people have this general idea that racists are just racist across the board, but that's not the case at all. From my own personal experiences in places like your left-leaning City College of New York, I have seen racism being applied to a black man differently than a black woman. And again, when you have issues like your police brutality, your racial profiling, black men get a completely different experience than a black woman. And that's why black men have to come out and take the lead on this issue, because the only way we can get people to acknowledge these problems as related to race and racism and racial violence and racial hatred is if black men come out here and speak for themselves. But we're not getting many black men out here to speak for themselves. Instead, we have people representing us and our issues. And again, that shows how weak black men are, because if someone is speaking for you, they are not going to be able to articulate the points that you're going to need to be articulated, nor are they going to go out here and advocate for the type of change you want. Because I'm looking at this whole George Floyd situation from a critical perspective, and I hear all of these different talking points where they're talking, like this black woman who was in Minneapolis talking about she wanted to disband the police. And again, that's an emotional argument that makes no logical sense. And that's not what black men want. And in addition, we see these local governments talking about they want to defund the police and give out community programs. That's not also what black men want. When it comes down to most black men, what we want is an investment in black men. We want full-time employment for black men. We want economic opportunities to build black-owned businesses. And we want support for black fathers. That's one of the things we would want if we had enough brothers to get together for an agenda. Because when we have an agenda, we sit there and say we want things like employment, because employment is hard for black men to get. We want protections for our employment so that we won't get fired by people, racist in these companies who have malice of forethought as related to our employment and look for ways to get us terminated. And we want to have opportunities to get loans and be able to open and build black-owned businesses. And we want an investment in black men, because if we're going to go out here and talk about getting reforms, the type of reforms we're looking for, in addition to that, and to the employment issue, we're also looking for reforms in the police to deal with this police brutality, where we're taking control over the community, and we're having black men and women employed in these jobs patrolling the community as a part of law enforcement. That's what we want. But the whole argument is being skewed because we have people talking for black men but not looking to listen to black men, because that's why I believe we need to have black men taking the lead on this issue, because the things that the black community needs and the reforms that the black community needs are not getting implemented. Instead, we're getting a lot of these people getting emotional. We're getting a lot of these symbolic gestures out here that are meant to make people feel good, because when you have black females speaking for black men, they can be easily pacified by a symbolic gesture, but there's no efforts to make real and tangible change. And that's what, when you have black men speaking for themselves, you're going to get real and tangible change, because when you have black men who are on code and focused on an agenda, they are going to focus on getting change and not some superficial symbolism that makes people feel good. Because that's what I see a lot of these politicians doing. Like when I listened to that congressional hearing with George Floyd's brother, yes, they had a black man speaking at that forum, but they were leading that black man, and he really was not articulating what needed to be articulated at that congressional hearing. So when I listened to him, he really was not in a place where he could present a platform or an agenda as related to tangibles. And that's something that the opposition does because they want to, again, make you feel good. And a lot of these corporations are also doing the same thing. Like, for example, when they're talking about HBO Max taking Gone with the Wind off because they said that it was too racist, or you have all these companies making these donations out here talking about they're fighting against prejudice and racism. These are all symbolic gestures, just like taking down all of these so-called Confederate statues. All of this is symbolism. It makes people feel good, but it doesn't lead to any sort of actual growth. And the only way we're going to get growth that leads to real change is if black men take the lead as related to this issue of police brutality, racial profiling, and racism here in America. Because when you have black men leading as related to these issues, they can start to put together an agenda that is focused on tangibles and not feel-good symbolism that makes people, again, tells them what they want to hear, but does not allow them to learn what they need to know in order to grow. And when you have black men in charge, you're not going to have guys like Joe Biden coming out here and saying he wants to go out here and give money to both blacks and Native Americans, because the adding of other ethnic groups shows how disingenuous he truly is. Because if he were serious about trying to help black men, he would be looking to listen to black men who are presenting an agenda to him. Unfortunately, what has happened here is we have had everybody else jumping in front of black men and looking to speak for us, like the black women who were a part of Black Lives Matter, like many of these white people on the left and the right, and many of these old civil rights leaders out here who have gone and made numerous failed proposals that have done absolutely nothing. Everybody is speaking for the black man and looking to get benefits for themselves, but the black man is not speaking for himself and putting together a platform of demands for change. Now, I think if black men were the ones leading the charge, we would see a completely different attitude from many of these people in government. We would end big business, because if black men were out here speaking for themselves and demanding change, we would see, again, a lot of this acquiescence turning into hostility, because all of those people would know that there would be a real effort for genuine change. Because if black men, as I see it, we don't understand how we're looking out here in the international community when we have your black women leading the charge for your change, and we have your whites and non-blacks making most of the proposals for change, because they're telling us what we're supposed to accept, instead of us going to them and demanding what we want. Because with all of that support that we got in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd and this push for change, nothing is going to change unless black men come out here and take the lead on their own issues. Because as I see it, police brutality, racial profiling, these are black men's issues, because black men are the ones primarily mostly impacted by them, and it's up to black men to have enough self-worth to step up and start speaking for themselves and not let a group of mouthpieces do the talking for them. Because when you let a group of mouthpieces do the talking for you, like Black Lives Matter, like these white and non-black people on the right and the left, or these trotted out Hollywood celebrities like your Terry Crews, it really hurts us as a collective, because it shows how weak we are as a collective. Because as a collective, black men, we need to be the ones in front of this. We need to be the ones going out here and making the demands, and we need to be the ones demanding tangible changes to our criminal justice system, tangible changes to the laws of this land, and tangible changes to policies in this country, so that black men can get an equal opportunity, and we can finally deal with the ultimate foundation of white supremacy and racism here in America as related to black men, and this fear that many of these racists have as related to black men, which was instilled by many people by these old stereotypes that were created in propaganda from the antebellum South. And again, we need black men at the forefront, because the only person who can fight for you is you. And that's something black men need to understand, that the only person who can take a stand for you is you. Because when others stand for you, they aren't looking out for your best interest. They are looking out for an opportunity to advance themselves at your expense. And they see your weakness as a way to strengthen themselves. So when I look at it, black men, we need to be out here speaking for ourselves, standing up for ourselves, and making our demands for tangible change out here. Because if we don't take the lead for ourselves and look to change, to get change, we're not going to get any change. And in fact, instead of us working towards a solution, all we're going to do is to keep dancing and talking around the problem, and the problem of racism, racial profiling, and police brutality isn't going to change, because we have a group of people who are out to get their little goodies off the top. Meanwhile, the brothers in the street still remain at the bottom. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, and my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to try some of my positive African American fiction and support a black-owned business, you can pick up all of my books on Amazon.com, Smashwords, or Google Play by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and coming to Kindle Unlimited, John Haynes, Dark Succubus. The man who rules the world is tempted by a sultry succubus in this all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get John Haynes, Dark Succubus in paperback or pre-order on Kindle Unlimited today.